My name is Dan Plazak, and I'm a retired geologist, and I still can't get it out of my head, so I keep writing about the subject.
I'm glad you said Plazak because every time I look at your last name, I want to say PLAY-zack. So I'm glad you pronounced it.
Well, there's no correct way to pronounce it.
Wait, there is. The proper way to pronounce it is the way you pronounce your name. You get to pronounce your name any way you want.
I suppose so. I've got relatives who spell it three different ways.
Did it? What is the ethnic or national origin of that name? And is it one of the ones that got screwed up at the immigration office in history?
Well, no, it wasn't screwed up at the immigration office. It's a Czech name, but it originally only had one vowel. My ancestors were so poor when they came over they could only afford one vowel. It was PLZAK, which actually means Pilsner, as in the beer.
Is it a kind of Pilsner, or literally that's the word for
Someone from the town of Pilsen.
Did you ever 23andMe or have you ever been into looking up your heritage?
Oh, one of my sisters has. I haven't, but I've been back over there.
Oh. Where did you come from and how's it fit into all the different permutations of what is called Czechoslovakia? Like where you came from, what country is that now?
Czech Republic.
Okay, Czech Republic. Is it a tiny town or was it a major city?
It's a fairly major city. It's an interesting place. It has a George S. Patton museum.
Wait, does it have a Patton museum because they love what Patton did during World War II so much?
Yes. He ended up his campaign at Pilsen. He was headed eastward, and they told him to stop.
Did is that when you go to the museum or learn about it, was Patton mad about being told to stop?
I imagine he was, but it doesn't say anything about it.
Did you spend a lot of time in that town when you went to the Czech Republic, or did you kind of go all over?
Oh, I went all over. I was mostly interested in other places actually, but I happened to land there, and I can send you pictures later. Every year they have a Liberation Day festival where they dress
Whoa.
up in 1940s World War II American costumes. They have these old jeeps, or they ride around, and they actually had the Count Basie Orchestra there to play a concert in the city square. It's a big deal.
What? It's that's so weird. It's this weird American nostalgia thing, like some kind of like a Yankee Doodle Dandy thing happening in some far off country.
Well, um, what can I say? They remember their friends.
I appreciate that loyalty.
I saw more American flags waved that weekend than I have in a long time.
Is English spoken heavily in the Czech Republic?
No.
Okay, not at all.
Tourist places, but and it's a tough language.
Okay.
Yeah, I could never get the hang of it.
Is there, when you were there, is there a close number two language, or is Czech like by far the absolute dominant language?
Well, like most Europeans, they speak. Most of them speak more than one language. Uh, German is a good language to speak.
Okay. Well, you didn't have to talk to me about all the derivation of your last name. I stumbled onto you online because I think, what is it called? The Great Diamond Heist? Does it have an official name?
Oh, it's the Great Diamond Hoax or the Great Diamond Swindle.
Okay. But before we get into that, so when I went looking, I found something you'd written about that, and so that got me interested. But you got interested in these things because you had a long career in geology. So maybe you could tell me a little bit about how'd you get into geology? How long did you go? And what was the trigger that got you to finally retire and say, I'm going to take a break now?
Well, what can I say? I've always loved the idea of digging things, finding things underground. I don't know what it is. There's something about it that's always fascinated me. And so I went to school, got a degree in geology, went off, looked for oil and uranium and gold and industrial minerals, sulfur.
Was there ever a particular thing that you specialized in, or did your skills allow you to really go poking around in the ground for a lot of valuable stuff?
Well, I sort of bounced around every time there was a boom in something or other. I tended to join in and follow it for a while till the boom went bust, and I went on to something else. Mostly, I spent my time in oil.
Do you remember when you say? I mean, you sort of humbly say, "Oh, I just like digging around in the ground." Do you remember that all the way back when you were a kid?
Absolutely.
How did it manifest as a kid? What did you imagine? Did you used to bury stuff and dig it up, or what did you look for when you were a kid?
Well, I remember when I was 5 years old, I talked some of my friends into digging a hole looking for pirate treasure or something. We got tired before we dug very far down.
Oh, dang it. So you didn't find it? So if you were digging for something to find, did you ever do the thing where you tried to dig straight down to see how far you get? Like, could you get to the middle of the earth or?
Not hardly.
Okay. So you were smart. Even as a child, you were smart enough to know you couldn't get to the Earth's core. That's good.
Well, I was smart enough. I got tired, and everyone got bored and went off and found something else to do.
Before college, in college, and after, was geology definitely the most interesting thing that you studied? Or was it something you just thought, I want to do this as a job, so I'm going to study this?
Well, both. I've always been interested in minerals and stuff down in the earth, digging up dinosaur bones, whatever. And so, yeah, it was both a way to get a job and what I was most interested
in. You mentioned those dinosaur bones, and obviously, if you're digging for oil, you're kind of digging for dinosaur bones, but not really. Did you ever think, I want to be an archaeologist?
Well, actually, it's paleontologist for dinosaur bones.
Oh, you're right.
But well, I've always been interested in ancient cultures as well. I've been to a lot of the pre-Columbian ruins in Latin America and the Southwest U.S. The whole thing fascinates me.
Did you ever dig inside yourself enough to figure out, I wonder what the appeal is about layers under the Earth's surface?
Well, it's just the question of what's hidden under the Earth's surface. And there's a certain romance to it, I guess. Although, I was never one to risk all my own money on a spin of the wheel, and I'm a little too risk averse to go broke doing it.
It's interesting when you said kind of jumping from thing to thing, as one thing in the ground was worth more at any particular time. And you never, you've read about in the past or even in the present, people who kind of stake their entire claim on going somewhere and trying to find something, but nothing looked good enough, or that wasn't your personality, where you're like, I take all my money and try to go dig something out in this one spot.
Well, I'm a little bit too risk averse to bet all my money on one thing. I know people who have, and people who've gotten rich over it, but I don't know. I was never one of them.
Did you have to do a lot of traveling through this career and live in different places, or was it just kind of short-term travel?
Mostly short-term travel. I've done short-term travel. Mexico, Peru on jobs, and various places in the U.S.
So maybe it is a natural trajectory, the job of geology, and then getting interested in mine and geology scams. But what inspired you ultimately to write a book? I'm looking at it. I got it on my shelf.
Well, what inspired me to write the book is I couldn't find a book on the subject. I had to write it myself.
Did it feel like an opportunity, or it felt like, well, this has to be told?
Well, a little bit of both. I especially liked the title. I wanted to nail that down before someone else grabbed it. But
okay, tell me. I know what the title is, but for listeners, what was the title you love so much? Like, I got to do it.
The title is "A Hole in the Ground with a Liar at the Top," which was
a great one.
Supposedly Mark Twain's definition of a gold mine, although no one knows if he ever actually said it. It's actually a play on an old English saying that a mine is a hole in the ground with a Cornishman at the bottom.
Wait, what's the spin? Is it a crook at the bottom? Who is the Cornish man represent at the bottom?
Oh, the Cornish are famous for being metal miners.
Oh, that seems nicer than saying the liar at the top.
Yeah, it is. But well, it's a sort of a cynical American take on the whole thing. But no, what happened when I was going to grad school at the Colorado School of Mines near here where I live, and between classes, I'd go to the library and relax. I'd thumb through these old mining magazines, and they had these magazines from 100 years ago, and I'd thumb through, and every week they'd expose these swindles, and they'd just tear into them horribly, but it didn't seem to make any difference. These swindlers would just keep selling their phony stock, and I'd thumb through these old magazines week after week, and I'd say there are stories here that are great. And one of the stories was the great diamond hoax.
So you do have a chapter on that. Let's talk about that.
You bet.
What were the circumstances of this diamond hoax?
Well, basically, there are a couple of old prospectors from Kentucky who weren't having very much luck, and they thought they'd found some diamonds, and they showed them to a jeweler in San Francisco, and he said, "Well, these aren't really diamonds and rubies; these are just quartz crystals and garnets." But these two guys realized, if they could get a hold of a couple of diamonds and throw them in the mix, they could sell their prospect for a lot of money. And so to start with, they got some industrial diamonds from someone that was making diamond tip drill bits.
Okay.
And they showed these industrial diamonds to someone who showed them to a jeweler, said, "Yeah, these are real diamonds." And they started to get excited, and the guy paid them, I think $10,000 for an option on the claim. They took the $10,000, went to London, and bought a bunch of real diamonds. And they brought those back, and they said, "Well, see what we found again," and everyone started going berserk. And they they'd string them along and they'd give them some more money. They'd run back to London and buy some more diamonds. And so this is 1872, and no one had the slightest idea of how to look for diamonds. But they finally they had to show their investors where they found these diamonds. So they went to basically a field in northwest Colorado and sprinkled diamonds around. And it was fairly out of the way then. You had to go a couple days by horse from the nearest railway station, but they brought their investors there, and the investors started finding diamonds. And this is going to be a multi-million-dollar deal. All the newspapers were full of it, but everyone was looking for this, the American Diamond Fields, but no one knew where it was. But finally, they left enough clues that there was a geologist working for the federal government, a guy by the name of Clarence King, who figured out where it was from the clues. And he went there, and he figured that the diamonds had just been scattered around. He did a little digging, and once you dug below the surface, there weren't any. And so he went back and exposed the whole thing. And the principals scattered, went back to Kentucky. And there were a number of other people who were suspected of being in on it, but no one could ever prove exactly who was in and who was on the outside.
That was a strange thing to hear at the end, that the people who perpetrated it just sort of disappeared into the weeds.
Well, of course, there are two cousins, Arnold and Slack, who were the originals. Slack sold out early, and he just kind of disappeared. He finally wound up in a little town in New Mexico as an undertaker. His cousin got the most money, and he went back and started a bank in I can't remember the name of the town in Kentucky. But he was sort of famous there. As he said, he out Yankeed the Yankees, and so they settled out of court, got a little bit of money from him, but he had enough to keep his bank.
I wonder, that was another thing in digging into that story, to hear you explain that some of the fraud charges we think about today were not in the law. So when you say he went to court, this was just a civil suit they brought against him and said he tricked us and they owe us money, but there was no charge. Were there charges that could be brought up against these guys?
Well, most people left California where the whole thing took place, all the financial transactions. As a matter of fact, there were a couple of the financiers who sort of packed up quickly and left California. There was Asbury Harpenting and his partner George D. Roberts.
Yeah,
they both quickly left the state, as did the two cousins from Kentucky. And extradition wasn't very easy back then, especially if you had a sympathetic home state officials protecting you.
Were they sympathetic because they liked these guys, or were they sympathetic because they were sympathetic to this sort of fraudulent business?
Well, I think they're sort of hometown boys,
Okay.
Kentuckians who made good.
Well, sort of made good in quotation marks.
Well, they're hometown boys, so they sort of got some protection. But no, back then there's no prohibitions against insider trading. That was endemic. It was just assumed that the insiders would cheat everybody else. In fact, there's one example of a mine in Colorado where the insiders cheated everyone else, and one of the newspapers said, "Well, I do the same thing. Everyone else would do the same thing." It was justified. Well,
Justified.
well, as far as they were concerned, and there was an example in Nevada on the Comstock lode of after the insiders had found this ore body they called the Big Bonanza. They started tipping their friends off to buy shares in the company, and there's complete insider trading. But the San Francisco Chronicle called it a bright spot of good, honest charity because they're tipping their friends off.
That is interesting. I was going to ask, did they just sort of dismiss that kind of behavior as, well, you're an idiot sucker if you get taken in by that? But now it sounds like they're like, well, look, if you get in on a deal at the first level, it's expected that you're going to give your family and friends advantages. And you're going to suck as much money out of that thing as you can.
That was the attitude in a lot of these things. It was a real dog eat dog business, and everyone assumed that the insiders were going to make inside deals.
From your impression, when you were looking at these magazine articles and seeing that right alongside stories debunking particular deals, there would be advertisements for talking about the fact that those deals existed, does it seem like these situations were sort of, are the scams bad people who are really good at lying, or is it generally, do they take you take the attitude that, well, there's a lot of good people, they were just too hungry to make easy money. It all felt like easy money. So do you blame the fraudsters or the fraudees, or do you fall somewhere in the middle?
I guess I would blame the fraudsters. Not everyone sympathized with them.
Okay.
You have to judge people as they were judged, sort of in their own, by the standards of their own times, and these guys were criticized pretty heavily, as were a lot of the people who manipulated railroad stock back in New York, or people such as, say, John D. Rockefeller, who monopolized the oil refining business. They were terribly criticized.
Now, I think I read some stuff from you, somewhere else, now I can't remember, but there'd also be these repeated situations, and maybe that's a little bit what happens in magazines, where they talked about like the gold mines of Kansas that would pop up again and again, and it seems like these people out there were eager to drive that dynamic, the belief that there could still be gold, El Dorado in Kansas. That's interesting too. Did you see a lot of scams that kind of would die and come up and die and come up again?
Well, yes, that too, and certainly there's a strong push within people to believe that these things are true. And what you talk about, the gold mines of Kansas, in central Kansas, there are a couple of counties where people were convinced that these shales, which have nothing in them, were rich in gold. And so the people who believed in them would fall for every sucker, or would fall for every con artist who came along with a secret process to get the gold out. They're convinced the gold was there if they could just extract it the right way. And when you have people who believe something like that, sooner or later someone's going to come along and take advantage of them.
And it also, like those sort of conspiracies or old wives' tales, the things that just sort of pop up and don't die, it does make you wonder, are the people who are just kind of hungry for this thing to be true drive it, or do these people look around for an opportunity and maybe the two things just come together? There's a certain set of people that want this to be true, and there's another set of people that figure out they can sell them something because they want it to be true.
Oh, yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. The conjunction of both. You've got the swindlers who come around, and you've got the people who want to be swindled almost.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned in the article, the whole thing about gold in Kansas started out with Coronado. He was looking for the cities of gold, and he was convinced they're out on the plains somewhere. And when you hear these tales based on rumors and you just want to believe them, they become hard to turn down.
Did you find instances in any of your research where if people who were confronted once, I don't know, once they got past any anger or frustration or sadness that they'd lost money in these deals, did anybody ever talk about the fact that kind of self-reflect and say, well, why did I believe this for so long? Or I really wanted this to be true and it wasn't? Or was that not really represented in these stories in the aftermath?
I didn't find that.
Okay.
I didn't find much self-reflection.
So another thing that surprised me is when I went digging, obviously I was digging into an old heist, an old hoax, an old scheme. And I figured this stuff is all gone. Nobody's perpetrating mining now. Nobody's planting fake stuff in the ground now. Surely in our advanced age, this never happens. But then you told me it does. So I don't know. Could you give an example of something in recent history of where this is still going on?
Well, in the late 1990s, there was the big Bre-X fraud. Bre-X was a penny stock out of Calgary, Alberta, and these guys had some mining rights in Indonesia, and they started reporting that huge amounts of gold, and it was a low grade deposit, but it was one of the way they portrayed it, it was one of the world's largest reserves of gold ore.
Okay.
And this little penny stock company soon had a market capitalization of literally billions of dollars.
Holy moly!
And it was put on the main Canadian stock exchange in Toronto. These guys started cashing out. They were rich. Finally, an outside outfit went and sampled it, and there was no gold. And so what happened, as near as anyone can figure, is that one of the field geologists was buying gold dust from the natives or panning it in the river, and is sprinkling it in his in the samples. And it worked for a couple of years, and when it stopped working, this Philippine field geologist disappeared or died under mysterious circumstances, and no one's quite sure if he's dead yet.
That convenient disappearance of people seems to happen. I was really intrigued. Maybe I shouldn't. I don't want to jump off mines and geology first. I didn't.
Let me tell you the story of this Philippine geologist. He was riding in a helicopter, and the pilot looked over, and he was gone. And so the pilot reported that he jumped out.
Okay.
Now there were of course rumors that he was pushed out. They found a body decomposed in the jungle wearing his blue jeans some weeks later. But one of his wives, he was married to various women at the same time. One of his wives back in the Philippines, about a year later, reported she got a large amount of cash sent from Brazil from the same guy. So who knows? He may have faked his own death.
Did any of this research into schemes like this, was this always kind of a side interest, or did your research of these things, did it ever influence how you approached your work as a geologist? I mean, did you ever see people who wanted something to be true, and you could see maybe they'd lean a little and I just never do that. That's a bad road.
I well, it's always a question of you know, there's a point where salesmanship gets a little bit ridiculous. Uh, but a lot of things are possible, but you can't lie, and if you lie, you get caught. It's very difficult to do it now. There are all sorts of laws against it.
So there's just more ways to get caught in the net. If you do something wrong, there's more laws that'll catch you.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Um, you've got the Securities and Exchange Commission that only came around in the 1930s. So if you sell shares of stock or fractional interest in anything, it comes under their jurisdiction, and they have very complicated rules to follow if you want to do that.
Has studying these scams made you more skeptical or more cynical about people?
Yeah, I think so. I've always been a little bit cynical about people, but I've run into things I thought were sort of on the scamish side.
Yeah.
I remember a guy I was looking for wanted me to look at a report on a gold mine in Brazil, and so I was looking at this assay report of a lab in Vancouver, and it was just full of language errors. It was obviously written by someone who was not a native English speaker. And I thought, well, someone got a hold of some letterhead here. There's something wrong with this assay report. So I just said, well, we ought to drop this whole deal.
Was the boss happy with that, or was it intensely disappointing, or they figured, oh no, we expect some of these things to fall over?
Oh, yeah, he's he had a lot of other things to look at. It wasn't a big disappointment.
Speaking of disappearing people, you wrote another article that I thought was very timely because I have seen in the news in the past years about people who get disappeared by the government trying to make gasoline out of water. And I was surprised to see how far back this particular thing went. I thought it was fascinating because this is happening now. I literally just saw recently there's a claim that someone who died or who got shot in a recent mass shooting, oh, they won't tell you this, but he just discovered gasoline out of water things. Maybe we could talk a little bit about this because I think this has popped up again and again and again, this idea that people are making gas out of water. I don't know. Tell me a little bit about this because I think it pops up over and over again.
Well, the fuel swindles go back farther, but the first gasoline out of water swindle that I'm aware of was done by a guy by the name of John Andrews, who lived in Pennsylvania. He did it in the early 19 teens.
Okay.
I think 1914, 1913, somewhere along there. And he would basically, so someone would leave him with a bucket of water, and he'd add some chemicals, and they'd turn it into motor fuel, supposedly. But he would, when things got too hot, he'd disappear. And everyone said, "Oh, he's been kidnapped or killed or whatnot." But then he'd pop up again, and he actually he started this thing around 1912, 1913, and he died in, I think, 1952 at the age of 66. He just disappeared when it was convenient to him. when the law was getting a little too close. But he ran this. No one's quite sure how he did it, but he ran this gasoline from water scam for a good 10 years before he dropped it. But there are all these versions that he disappeared and he was killed or this and that. He lived to a ripe old age at his farm in western Pennsylvania. And other people picked up the scam. There are at least half a dozen of them after him. He set the pattern.
And the other side of it is interesting, whether those people were actually working the scam or not. This story about the reason someone has disappeared or the reason this person was killed, they were just about to reveal, they'd come up with, and it's the oil companies that killed them or the government that killed them. And so I don't know if that popped up. Have you seen that side plot line pop up in any of these things?
Oh, sure. Yeah. They were bought off or intimidated
right.
or killed, but I don't know. None of it makes sense to me because I don't see any physically any way you can make fuel out of water without adding more energy than you would create. So to me, it's always been a kind of an impossibility to begin with. But if you want to talk about the big oil companies, I always thought, well, that's in America, but you could go over to Japan, and I don't think the scientists over in Japan are any slackers. And the one who can come up with a way to make fuel out of water would be a national hero. Really, in Japan, they import all their oil essentially, and so they don't have the big oil companies over there to dominate things, and they haven't come up with it. Although there have been at least one diesel fuel from water swindle that went on in Japan, but they caught the guy red-handed, and it didn't work for very long.
I was also happy to see you send me an article about doodlebugs, and I had never known what a doodlebug was. So why don't you tell what's a doodlebug? It sounds like some made up thing, but it's a name for an actual thing.
Well, a doodlebug, well, it's obviously a slang term for a machine that is supposed to find oil,
okay,
but doesn't. But it's sort of slang. Some geophysicists will sort of jokingly call themselves doodlebuggers when they're actually using a good geophysical technique. But it originated as a term for these magical machines to find oil. And I actually, well, that's just sort of my latest interest of writing about these stories, these people who invent machines to find oil.
It reminds me, I just saw there's a video game machine I saw I think it was in Eastern Europe or Central Europe, sort of in the late 80s, and they never able to develop the inside, so they just made the outside, which looked like a video game machine, but the inside was nothing. It reminds me of these things, these machines that actually, if you take them apart, I mean, they're not really doing anything. Are any of the versions of these things that are hunting for liquid under the surface of the earth in some way, were any of them actually doing anything, or usually the insides were just nonsense machinery?
No, I'd say most of them did something. Most of it was unrelated to oil.
Okay.
But there were some that that detect transient electrical currents in the ground, and some people think those are correlated with oil deposits, but it's not a very effective way to find oil as far as I know. But some of them were just purely in people's imagination, and some of them were slightly modified dowsing rods.
I wanted to ask you about that too, because I remember my dad was a my dad was a lineman, and somewhere along the line, he got housing rods, and he just thought this is a load of crap. Uh, Instantly skeptical. This can't possibly work. But he seemed to think in a few times. In fact, he bought a couple, and I mean, he didn't use them all the time, but he thought, you know what? I really saw another guy walking around, and the dowsing rods seemed to work in identifying where the water pipe was. I want you to tell me, dowsing rods, just absolutely nothing to them.
Well, what causes the rods to move or to swing or
Yes.
is pretty well established. It's subconscious movements of the hands. So, and even some dowsers disagree with that. Some agree with it. But what you're doing is you're tapping into your subconscious. Now the question is there anything there? What's driving your subconscious? Is there some level of clairvoyance, or are you tapping into some knowledge and some clues on the surface on where this is likely to be? And that's the big question, and I don't know the answer.
That is interesting. It does remind me. I feel like a lot of the psychic stuff has sort of started to lean into. There are things happening. We now know there are things happening in the brain that we don't fully understand. And so this idea, could you be sensitive to things? Yeah, could you be sensitive to things that you can't perceive consciously, but that your brain or your body in some way could be sensitive to?
Yeah, exactly. Or people who work with underground utilities, they tend to get a sense of where the utilities are likely to run, even if they're not consciously aware of it.
In doing geology stuff, did you ever feel that you had a sort of intuition about things, or did you see other people who seemed, wow, how does that person know this is here or that's there?
I don't think I ran into any of those people. There's some people who've certainly uh, credited that people who think that they've got a sort of a combination of education and intuition about these things. I never felt that I had it, and I haven't personally met someone that I thought had it, but uh, some people do.
What now? So you've written this one book. Are you ever planning? Would you ever be interested enough in any other topic to write another book? I mean, you're still writing articles. What kind of stuff are you interested in now and working
Well,
on now?
the doodlebugs.
It's fun to be curious about.
Actually, uh, it'll probably take another year, but I'll have a book out on doodlebugs.
Oh, criminy! That's awesome.
I just got I just got a contract sent to me by Texas Tech University Press. They're interested in publishing it.
Can I ask your first book about mining schemes and then this one about doodlebugs? Is there a particular niche that those two books fall into? Is it people into geology, or is it people into early American history? People into engineering, and I don't know, with the doodlebugs, maybe people who are interested in the mechanics of these things. Where do you feel like it falls in?
I'm not sure who buys the books. Or who bought my first book. I suppose is mostly people interested in his historical aspects of the thing. This one might be a little bit more inside baseball and appeal to people in the oil business.
Do you still feel like, because that other one I've read a few chapters already. I think it's very much the first book you did is very much readable by anybody, historian or anybody with even a small interest in crime and all that stuff. Is this one? Does it feel like you're going to go deeper into the machines, and that's why it feels like a little closer to just that industry? Or are you also going to write it with the idea that, oh no, I want this. I want anybody to pick this up and read about it.
Well, I want able to anyone to be able to pick it up, but it the nature of the thing is going to have more jargon in it. I have to figure out how to get around that.
Okay.
But certainly, I think a lot of these are good stories, and I hate to ruin a good story by filling it with too much jargon.
Because these doodlebugs are actually machines, are you going to spend a lot of time? I mean, we talk about jargon. Are you also going to spend a lot of time sort of trying to look at the inner workings and ask what the heck's supposed to be going on here?
Well, there are very few of them that they're left to look at.
Oh, crud.
Most of them, the big heyday was in the 1920s, and most of them have been thrown out in the trash.
Okay.
It's just hard to find. I found one up in Calgary, a black box with a bunch of nonsense electronics inside. Um, oh, I bought another on some eBay like platform, but most of them are gone. They're just disappeared.
Is it because the science of finding these things has gotten sophisticated enough where people just aren't as inclined to buy into the fact that they could buy something off some guy or buy something off some website that would tell them where it is? Is that why it's passed? Why do you think it's passed away?
Well, most of the doodlebugs were one of a kind, built by the inventors.
Okay.
And the inventor was the only one who knew what it was supposed to do, the only one who knew how to run it. And so, once he died, people found, well, here's Grandpa's old bric-a-brac. We don't know what it is. Toss it.
That's interesting. So it was never like sort of dowsing rods where anybody can come use this. I see it now. This is like, no, this is just in the back of his wagon, and he's not duplicating it. He can use it properly.
Most of them were like that.
Okay. Is there anything either in geology or when you look out at the world at looking at different new sciences and technologies or new ways to do things, do you ever feel like you kind of, man, that just seems, there's something that jumped out at you recently, just too good to be true. This doesn't seem too good to be true, jump out at you a lot more now.
What in the realm of science?
Well, I think so. Science and technology been so wildly successful for our planet for so long now, and some of the claims that get made for things on the far horizon that are just unproven. I think we feel maybe, oh, that's totally doable, and it turns out not to be. So, does your feel of science and technology feel just so much more realistic and grounded, or do you feel like some of the wildest horizons of things that people claim things are going to be able to do, you're like, well, I'll believe it when I see it?
Well, I think I'll probably believe it when I see it. Geology struggles. The people still haven't found a way to detect oil in the ground with any certainty.
And they desperately want to do that. Well, you're right. If they can't do that, is it really still just at the level people just have to stab the ground repeatedly to find a spot?
Well, it's not at random. That they've got geophysical and geological ways to narrow it down. But well, there are two kinds of what you call plays.
Okay.
There's an exploration play, which, if you can find the oil, it's going to make you money, but it's very restricted in the area.
Okay.
Now, they're also what they do with these fracking plays. They cover huge areas, and it's a question of it's an engineering question of getting it out at a profit. It's there. It's just can you go in there and give it a good frack and suck enough out to make money? So there are geological plays where it's restricted, and then there are engineering plays, which are these mostly frack plays these days that it's down there. It's a question of getting it out at a profit.
Well, and I would be curious, now I'd be remiss, I got to ask, so about the fracking. Obviously, in the past, I feel like 10, 15 years, people have talked a lot about the dangers. So about, okay, the ground pollution problems with fracking. But in addition, when you mentioned engineering, people talked about sucking this stuff out of the ground, causing some problems with the engineering of the rock or the soil. Did you ever get heavily into fracking in your time? And were there ever any really big issues with it? Or no, most of that stuff is kind of not as scary or weird as people think?
Well, there are big issues with it. A lot of it's overblown, but there are some genuine issues, such as the earthquakes in Oklahoma. And I don't know, it gets very technical. You've got anti-oil people trying to shoot it down, and you've got oil people such as myself with I can't. It's hard for me to be neutral on it.
Yes.
But I don't know. A lot of these things I read in the paper, and unless you dig into the nitty gritty, it's hard to judge whether it's genuine or not. The problem.
And as we think about things that are harder and harder to get out of the ground, like fracking over bigger areas and figuring out if it's even useful, what is the most lucrative or the weirdest thing in your career you've got to dig out of the ground?
That I've dug out of the ground?
Yeah, or been a part of, on any project or anything. It's just really weird that came out, or the thing that was like, that felt like when you hit it, wow, we hit a mother lode, it just blew you away.
Oh, geez, I'm afraid I can't think of anything right now.
A lot of the stuff felt more modest and understandable. It never felt like you'd hit the San Francisco gold vein.
No, I'm afraid not. There are a lot of geologists and very few that really hit like that, I'm afraid. And I'm not one of them so far.
Do a lot of geologists, are they, do a lot of geologists, do they have big dreams of finding massive wins, or really the geologists are kind of lean more toward the more middle of the road scientific approach where they're not looking for the big win, they're just thinking about, I don't know, a more reasonable expectation? Or have you met a lot of geologists who really just have the big dream?
Well, a little bit of both.
Okay.
You have to make a living in the meantime. And, certainly I know a lot of geologists have sort of gone off on their own, and, they might not hit home runs, but they hit enough singles and doubles to keep in the game.
And if you hadn't become a geologist, what would have been your number two? Is there like a career that got away?
Uh, geez, no, I don't think so. I can't
Oh,
imagine.
that's good.
I can't imagine not being a geologist.